Hello, this is something that I want to read to you. I call it The Big Picture. The introduction this is very long, and you might have to listen to it in several pieces. I have put this together because I feel that a bigger perspective of our history is needed at this time of change. There are other races of people across the cosmos, and a number of them have been coming and going from planet Earth for a very long time. The people of Earth have grown to the point that they are now ready to meet and work with those who have an evolved consciousness and advanced technological capacities. From us, it requires mature decision-making and commitment. Before we can make such decisions, however, it's important to have a better understanding of events that have transpired in the past. The things that follow here are a combination of events that I have known and experienced in the distant past, events I was taught before I came here, and the things that I have read or learned once I got here. So section 1 is ancient history. Earth is an outlier. It's on the edge of the Milky Way galaxy, a good place to stop and rest after long journeys through space between galaxies or star systems. For many years, that's exactly what the Earth was, an oasis of blue and green in an ocean of stars. We have a very long history of various races of beings coming here. Approximately 22 million years of history, maybe even 25. During this time, various races, including and especially the Pleiadians, brought rogue individuals here and dumped them off to survive the best they could. When beings can't get along, they usually get dumped somewhere. During this time, we had people from a variety of civilizations coming and going, and an ongoing cycle of building up and then destruction through fighting was going on planet Earth. This has especially been the case for about the last 400,000 years. Years that are mostly lost to us except for the most recent events. And the 25 million years before that are completely lost. About 40,000 years ago, the Alliance was formed when the Pleiadian nations developed themselves to a high spiritual level under the influence of spiritual leaders instead of military and scientific people. Then, about 2,000 years ago, a high council was formed by these nations of those races allied to the Pleiadians and observing the guidance from this council. The members of the Alliance are very interested in seeing Earth become part of the Alliance. They are working to enhance consciousness, develop technology, end wars, and resist the influence of the descendants of the Aryan race, which has always been focused on greed, destruction, gaining power over everyone in every form of life, and being worshipped as beautiful or wealthy or powerful or all of the above. So what we have here is a very, very sketchy look at the past 20 million years and the activity that was going on here, first as a place where people got dumped because they couldn't get along with anybody that was on their home planet, or they were too aggressive. And then gradually the formation of the Pleiadian Alliance. It's an alliance of nations, of star people, we'll call them star people, and the High Council, which was much later. and is a unique group that the people of Earth are moving toward becoming like them. I'll maybe say more about that later. So here's a little more recent history. Let us look briefly at the last 33,000 years when another effort was made to colonize Earth by a group from the Pleiades. This group was headed by a male and female couple named Atlant and Caryatide, along with Caryatide's father, Muras. They built 3 large cities. Each one of them built a city. Greater Atlantis, just off the western edge of Africa. Smaller Atlantis, known nowadays, I think, as Agartha, somewhere in or under the Himalayas or India. And Mu, which was in the area of the Gobi Desert, which is where I had a great deal of experience. All was good for thousands of years, and then fighting started. However, people did not want war and revolted. The result was that a group of scientists, engineers, and greedy leaders were expelled. This was about 15,000 years ago. They retreated to another planet for 2,000 years, where they developed technologies and strategies to take over the Earth. And then they returned to attack the Earth. The leader of this attack was Eris, and he succeeded in capturing the far northern regions of the planet. This was 13,000 years ago, before the change in the Earth's axis occurred. Once back on Earth, Eris continued his warring and his harassment for 1,500 years. During this time, the son of Eris, who was called Eris II, attacked from the northwest, driving in a southeasterly direction, and took over India, Pakistan, Persia, and into Sumer. India then became known as Arya after Eris II. This group of warlike beings had a strict rule, very strict, and this is pretty standard throughout many of the races, regarding racial purity. No mixing with the natives. However, one of the leaders, named Semjase, broke this rule. He captured, tamed, and then mated with a wild woman named Eva, and had a male child that he named Adam, who was now a hybrid, part descendant from ancient savage peoples who had been left here millions of years earlier, and part descendant from Semjas, from the ancient Pleiadian system. Later on, Semjas mated with another Earth woman and had a female hybrid child that they named Eve. And still later, Semjase ordered the 2 hybrids, Adam and Eve, to mate. The present mankind descended from these hybrids. Eris and his people eventually succeeded in infiltrating the leadership of the 3 big cities of Greater Atlantis, Agartha, and Mu. War activities then began between Atlantis and Mu. Atlantis destroyed Mu, but Mu knew this was coming and had prepared a weapon that destroyed Atlantis using a planetoid. This happened 11,500 years ago. This was then followed by a cosmic catastrophe 1,300 years later in 10,228, when Earth was hit by a meteorite. Another bigger catastrophe occurred only 135 years after that in 1093, when the destroyer passed dangerously close to the Earth. This is the unrecorded Great Flood. And the destroyer was a comet that got roped into the Earth, or the current, our our solar system. I can't remember what our solar system is called. Let's see. So that was the first flood, but it was not recorded. A second deluge occurred 2,123 years later in 7,970. This is the great flood that is recorded in the Bible. All was quiet for about 1,000 years until 6,919, when the destroyer passed by again, causing a third great flood. Another period of quiet followed. That period of quiet lasted for 3,466 years until the destroyer dragged Venus into a changed orbit, causing absolute havoc in the solar system and great flooding and volcanoes on Earth. This was 3,453 years ago, which would have been about 1,432 BC in our current calendar system. All has been quiet for the last 3,453 years. The destroyer was back in 1680, but did not come near enough to Earth to cause destruction. It is due back in 2255 AD, when it will again pass dangerously close to the Earth. Humans have completely swallowed the hierarchical model of power and control used by Eris and his band of scientists and military people. All of this is managed by religion, entertainment, and money, based on fear and pain. Today, we are struggling mightily to hang on to freedom, free will, and the potential to expand our wisdom, grace, and the power to align with life. So this piece on a more recent history, the last 33,000 years, actually comes from a piece that came out of a book by Billy Meyer. Some of it matches what I was told. The pieces around Atlantis match what I was told before I came here. So this next section is very recent history. So let's take a look at events closer to us in time that have brought us to today. Okay. In 1918, an occult group formed in Germany called the Thule Society. They took their name from, quote, a land located by Greco-Roman geographers in the far north called Thule, which actually referred to Scandinavia. The Thule Society believed that the earth was hollow, and their main goal was to prove that an ancient race of superior beings called Aryans once existed and possibly came from Atlantis. So they have some pieces there. There was an ancient race of very advanced beings called the Aryans, and they didn't come from Atlantis. Well, in a sense they did, but you have to be sure that you keep separate the people who were original Pleiadians, who came in, who were conquerors and colonizers, and the Pleiadians of today who are committed to peace, to taking care of one another, to stopping colonization, and letting people come to the great alignment on their own. So we have this occult society in Germany called the Thule Society. And they attracted very few followers, less than 2,000. And although they started as a group exploring occult theories, they soon began to focus on Jews and communists and eventually became the Deutsche Arbeiter Party, which I think means the German Workers' Party. Arbeiter means work and party means party, which then eventually became the Nazi Party. Quite a few years ago, I read that a couple of people in the Thule Society had begun channeling and connected with a source of information that offered them advice on how to build a spaceship. I can't remember where I read this because I dismissed it at the time, thinking it was just not possible to get the intricate levels of detail needed to build a spaceship by channeling. And that story isn't quite accurate. They were fed information, but they didn't get it by channeling per se. Okay. Around 1933, German engineers began trying to build an anti-gravity disc that could do what the pilots of World War I had witnessed in the unexplained Foo Fighters. In this effort, a man named Karl Haushofer was a key figure. Because of Haushofer's understanding of artillery and supply lines, Haushofer helped win the Franco-German War in 1871 and then taught at the War Academy. And I think he was still teaching by 1933. Meanwhile, over in the Far East, Japan was planning to take over the entire European and Asian continent. But they didn't think they could do this alone. They felt they needed help from the West End and also with artillery and getting supplies and ammunition where they needed it to go. They also needed an ally that could attack successfully from the west while they attacked from the east, and for these reasons, Haushofer was invited to come to Japan. Once in Japan, Haushofer eventually encountered the Black Dragon Society, which was the real base of power in Japan. Said Lee Kasten, who was the author of Secret Journey to Planet Serpo, said Lee Kasten, ultranationalistic, militaristic, and fascist, the Black Dragons, in addition to controlling Japan, had infiltrated the power centers of all the countries of East Asia, even extending to the United States. Although the Black Dragon Society was supposedly a secret society, they appear to have been mostly a front or a cover for a group that was even more secret and hidden, the Green Dragons, who were said to communicate telepathically with a very mysterious group that no one had ever seen, but who reportedly lived underground in the area of Tibet. The Society of Green Men. Maybe that's where we get our stories about little green men. The Green Men had been around for a long time and were enmeshed in black magic, psychic ability, and other occult powers. In retrospect, it has become clear that the Green Men were connected with the huge underground empire known as Patala of the reptilian extraterrestrials from Alpha Draconis, which is said to extend from southwestern Tibet all the way across the Indian subcontinent to Benares, India. He claims that locals around the lake have reportedly seen the reptilians in that region, have seen their wingless craft flying, entering, and leaving the mountains. We now know that the reptilians are closely associated with the Greys, originally from Zeta Reticuli. So when Haushofer left Japan, this was the German guy who had been invited over to teach them how to use artillery and get supplies wherever they needed to go, logistics, in other words. When he returned to Germany, he helped to start the Thule Society, which not only kept ties to the Green Dragons, it began raising money to buy the flying discs or to build the flying discs that used anti-gravity technology. Where were they getting this technology? It appears that it came from the mysterious green men living underground in Tibet, the same place that the reptilians lived, and the same place that Agartha originally was built. Okay. Haushofer also started the Vril Society, VRIL, which was reportedly a technology used to extend life, and that is correct. He began looking for a leader who would work with Japan to conquer Russia and then the entire Eurasian continent, and he settled on Hitler. When Hitler came to power in 1933, Haushofer arranged for a pact between Hitler and the reptilians from Patala through the mediation of the Green Men. At that point, the Vril Society became the technical arm of the SS, and the anti-gravity disc development became an SS operation. Although the development of the flying discs was super secret, and they were on a crash course to get something up and running in order to defeat the Allies, the war ended before they were successful. So the Nazis began to focus, instead of on winning the war, on developing this technology, these flying discs. Although General George S. Patton's Third Army was sent to Czechoslovakia to take control of the Nazi factory and laboratory that was known to be working on the flying discs, he arrived to find everything gone. But where had it gone? A carefully guarded secret was that in 1938, the Germans decided to establish a colony in Antarctica. They made a couple of visits there, the first one in 1901 and again in 1911. But now they were going all out to map an area called Queen Maud's Land, or Queen Maud's region. And in December of 1939, a ship left Hamburg headed for Antarctica, loaded with scientists and equipment. Various scientific teams were moved into the area, including hunters and trappers, collectors and zoologists, botanists, agriculturalists, plant specialists, mycologists, parasitologists, marine biologists, ornithologists, and many others. In 1940, the Nazis started to amass tractors, planes, sledges, gliders, and all sorts of machinery and materials in the South Polar regions, and for the next 4 years, Nazi technicians built on Antarctica the Führer's Shangri-La. And that comes from The Plain Truth, June 1952, a U.S. magazine. By the middle of 1943, the Allies noticed heavy submarine traffic in the South Atlantic. And by 1944, these subs were carrying technology along with Ukrainian and German women of pure blood, who were blonde, blue-eyed, and aged 17 to 24. At 4 women to each soldier, they were expected to breed the Aryan population of the new civilization under the Antarctica ice. A researcher and writer named Rob Arndt reported that after the war, between 142,000 and 250,000 people were unaccounted for, including the entire SS technical branch, the entire Vril and Thule Gesellschafts, which I think means societies, 6,000 scientists and technicians, and tens of thousands of slave laborers. By the time the war was over, British and American governments knew that the Nazis had established a thriving base on Antarctica. And when the British failed to take out the base, the Americans stepped in with Operation High Jump, headed by Admiral Richard Byrd. With 13 ships, an aircraft carrier, a half dozen planes, and 4,600 Marines, they headed south to Antarctica in early 1947, I think in February. They were going to spend 6 months there. No one knows exactly what happened during that mission, but it was suddenly canceled by Admiral Byrd only 2 months into the mission. Reportedly, they were attacked by flying discs that came at them from land, sea, and sky, completely outmaneuvering the entire group of ships. One of the ships just disappeared from the records. Nearly 70 men were killed. I think they lost all of the planes. And Byrd came home with his tail between his legs. After Admiral Byrd had been debriefed regarding Operation High Jump, those in charge in Washington, D.C. knew that the Nazi Third Reich had not just survived the war, they had skipped out on the war entirely, leaving the German people to finish it and take the brunt of the Allied punishment while they continued their research and development unimpeded and completely safe from interference under the ice in Antarctica. Not a single one of the Allies had the technology or weaponry that could be used to fight back. It was during this time, a time of helplessness and deep frustration over the turn of events in Antarctica, that the crash of 2 UFOs occurred over Roswell and Socorro, New Mexico. With an underdog's attitude of desperation, the U.S. pounced on the craft as if it were a gift from the gods. Suddenly, we had physical evidence that beings from elsewhere in the cosmos did exist, and we had a flying disc to use as a template for studying a whole new kind of technology based on an entirely new physics. We scooped up the surviving extraterrestrial and began learning to communicate. We took the craft to Wright-Patterson Air Base in Ohio and eventually to Area 51. And I'll just mention that I happened to work at Chrysler when I was an engineer with a fellow who had been one of the guards of that craft at Wright-Patterson. So that's when I first heard about that craft. Then we began to study and learn as if our lives depended on it, because they did. The ET, the one that we captured, so to speak, became known as EB1, and he lived until 1952. The last year of his life, he and the scientists at Los Alamos managed to send a half dozen messages to his planet. The messages were, number 1, he was still alive. Number 2, his ship crashed and all were killed except him. Number 3, please send a rescue craft. Number 4, would his people be willing to meet American officials? Number 5, the U.S. would like to implement an exchange program between planets. They wanted to visit and exchange culture, scientific information, and astronomical data. And number 6 was the landing coordinates to make this meeting happen. U.S. scientists did not receive a reply until 1955. Through painfully slow and difficult transmissions, the details were worked out for the Eben ship to return, to meet our officials, to pick up the bodies of their dead comrades, and to begin the exchange of 1 Eben scientist for 12 Earthmen. If you saw the movie Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, then you know pretty much what occurred. 12 Earthlings a commander, a second in command, 2 pilots, 2 doctors, 2 scientists, 2 linguists, 1 biologist, and 1 security officer got on board an Eben spaceship and traveled more than 10 months and almost 40 light years away to the Eben planet of Serpo. They stayed for over 12 years, and only 7 returned to Earth. 1 died in the spaceship on the way to Serpo, 2 died while there in an accident, and 2 chose to remain on Serpo because they fell in love with the people, the culture, the science, and the planet itself. It is not known whether those 2 ever returned. So if you wonder if our government has been telling the truth about other races in the universe, the answer is no, they lied. They're still lying, repeatedly. So this brings us back to the situation today, where we have gotten sort of bits and pieces of a ferociously compartmentalized and disjointed story about efforts to hide the presence of UFOs and ETs. In spite of a stream of denials, it's obvious that we have made a huge effort to grasp the principles of plasma physics, to back-engineer spacecraft, and to figure out new energy sources, navigation systems, and weaponry. We have been deeply engaged in trying to develop the ability to go safely into space, to understand the differences in perception and function that occur in differing regions of space, and to be ready to defend ourselves against those who would like to take over our planet, our nations, and our people. And although we have good reason to learn and understand all of the aspects of space travel that we possibly can, because it is part of our evolutionary process, it is more than likely that the most pressing reason for all of the denials is because it gave us time to catch up to the Nazis living and working in Antarctica, who undoubtedly took the longstanding and highly respected engineering abilities of the German people with them. And it is more than likely that the long string of denials is more of an effort to keep the Nazis from discovering that we have been in contact with other races of beings, or that we have exchanged information, people, and technology with them, or how far we have gotten in our development of spacecraft, our use of new forms of energy and new weaponry, and our ability to counter them in a confrontation. The only other reason for all of the denials would be that the Nazi Fourth Reich, in collaboration with beings from Zeta Reticuli or the reptilians or elsewhere, has already infiltrated our government and is in the process of taking over the major nations of the planet, a process of colonization by a foreign presence, in which case they would be sure to deny any and all connections to UFOs and ETs. They would hide any evidence of spacecraft and new energy or new weaponry, all because they do not want any of the existing national militaries to develop anything that could counter their efforts to take control. They also do not want to be held accountable should their plan fail. In fact, the Nazis could simply blame the mysterious UFOs and ETs for trying to take over while they slide back under the ice and remain hidden until another opportunity presents itself to take over. We cannot know where we're going if we don't know where we've been. When you look at the scenario unfolding on planet Earth now, it is eerily familiar. A group of angry scientists and engineers take hold of land in the polar south rather than the polar north. They infiltrate the leadership of the US, China, Russia, and other nations rather than the leaders of Atlantis, Agartha, and Mu. They harass and aggravate for decades until war breaks out and no one wins, not even the planet. And then we start over. It's not necessary to repeat the past. We are looking at a 100-year head start on the development of space technology, implementation of plasma physics by a group of Earth humans who have been trying for at least that long to get control of whole continents, if not the entire planet. We are looking at the creation of weapons that can erase any kind of physical form, plant, animal, mechanical, or human, by simply erasing its frequencies. We are looking at the collapse of the national structures that have managed our planet for centuries, while we remain fixed on looking in the rearview mirror and telling ourselves we can go back to how we used to live. We are looking at the presence of a myriad of sizes and shapes of spacecraft flitting through our skies while we stand there and nod as the government tells us we are seeing swamp gas. At what point do we think for ourselves and recognize what we are seeing? We are looking at the threat of being attacked by what will appear to be extraterrestrials when it would really be an attack by the leftover Nazis of the Third Reich who are attempting to set up the empire of the Fourth Reich, also known as the New World Order. And I believe the German name for it is something like the Naturalische Economica Orden, or something like that. We are looking at a new version of an old story, the attempt of a strongman-style takeover of land, air, water, and resources in order to get some people to pay homage, taxes, furs, concubines, chickens, whatever, to someone who thinks he is special and deserves more than anyone else. What part of we have been infiltrated and are being taken over do you not understand? Finally, we are looking at a set of perceptions that demand clarity, critical thinking, the ability to see forward in time, and a maturity of consciousness and spirit that are based in love, truth, freedom, and the laws of nature and reality. Can we rise to the occasion? If we want to survive, if we want a life that's worth living, we simply must. As we look at our future, the questions we must ask and then answer are, in no particular order here. Number one, why has the government repeatedly said there is no evidence of UFOs or ETs? Is it because they want to preserve the notion that we are still young, primitive, narrow, and uninterested in UFOs? Is it because they hope this will provide a cover for the frantic research and back engineering that is going on in an effort to catch up with the Nazis? Do they hope this pretended innocence will convince the Nazis that we are not a threat and we have no intention of confronting them someday? Or is it because the reptilian connection has declared that no announcement be made because they do not want it known that they are here pulling strings, making major decisions that affect our lives? This way they can remain anonymous, hiding behind certain political, financial, and corporate figures who appear to be making the decisions and who will take the fall if the reptilian takeover is not completed. This calls to mind President Trump or Q saying this is much bigger than you ever dreamed. And it is. Question number two. Why did John Kerry go to Antarctica the day of the US election in 2016? Was this because they knew they were going to lose and they needed to implement a strategy to not only hang on until they could get back in power again, but to implement a no-holds-barred plan for the next election that would guarantee their return to power? Number 3, what is fascism? Mussolini pointed out that the first stage of fascism should more appropriately be called corporatism, because it's the merger of state and corporate power. And that's a quote from Jim Marrs in The Rise of the Fourth Reich. The rise of corporatism is exactly what we are seeing right now. For corporatism to take over, big government has to be disemboweled, which is why Joe Biden is in the role of president. It's why he and the Congress are playing empty roles that accomplish nothing. With the corona ruse, almost all the small businesses across the US were shut down while all of the big corporate stores took over. It is these corporations that are demanding the masks and the distancing, refusing to let people in without masks, refusing to open their school doors to people without masks or without vaccines, setting special hours for certain groups of people and setting up the vaccination centers. In the meantime, the government has degenerated into an array of corporate and institutional mouthpieces, both foreign and domestic, in the form of the World Health Organization, the Center for Disease Control, the medical system, the big pharmaceuticals, and the big box stores such as Walmart, Home Depot, and others. If you do a series of searches on Google asking, who is the biggest employer in the state of, and name any American state, you will find that a hospital medical system is the biggest employer in almost every state. When it is not the number 1 employer, it will be in the number 2 spot and very occasionally the number 3. And everything else falls after that. Can we say that we are being crippled and sickened in order to undermine our power and vitality, creating low energy, doubt, and confusion? Because unhealthy people are not as able to think clearly or defend themselves as effectively as superbly healthy people. The coronavirus ruse is the perfect setover for a corporate takeover. Number 4, what do we see happening in the US today with a government that has less focus than a 3-year-old and less impact than Saturday morning cartoons? We see a few opinionated, pompous, and controlling CEOs and bankers giving orders. Unfortunately, the population of the US is not in the habit of participating in the operations of their country, and they're too naive to recognize what is happening. And what is happening is that our Constitution is slowly being shredded. It may very well be that we are being taken over by a group of people from another place in the cosmos who are working hand in glove with long forgotten enemies who have remained out of sight and out of mind. Number 5, what did we know about the Nazis and what was their agenda? So if we start from the Thule Society, they believed that the earth was hollow, and they sought to prove that a superior race of people called Aryans once existed. And they're correct about the Aryans. A race of people called Aryans did exist and live here. The problem is that they were not superior. They were angry people who wanted vengeance for being kicked off the planet, and they were more aggressive. They had developed serious weaponry and were determined to get control of the Earth. They ran up against those members of the Alliance, the Pleiadian Alliance, who live in harmony with natural laws, and the contest was on. The Alliance refuses to violate natural law, which says that people are not ready for power and freedom if they haven't reached for it, worked for it, earned it. Such people cannot be saved. They can only be assisted if they show signs of trying to save themselves. Thus, the reptilian Nazi agenda continues to roll forward as quickly as they can push it because not enough Earth humans see what is really unfolding. Number 6, what is our true history? We have almost no idea of our true history. A huge majority of people still think we were cavemen who emerged from the caves when we discovered agriculture 8,000 or 9,000 years ago. Their idea of ancient history encompasses the Egyptians and the Sumerians, but it ignores the Asian cultures altogether, which go back at least 30,000 years. And even that is a drop in the bucket of time when you consider the various races of beings who have been coming and going from this planet for over 20 million years. They've been using it mostly as a dumping ground where they could get rid of those beings in their cultures who were ill-behaved, distorted, or criminal. There are several old sayings that go something like, "You can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been." Or maybe you've heard, "He who controls the past controls the future." Since the entire planet has been used for millions of years as a refuge for people who do not have the self-discipline to control themselves or their need to dominate and destroy, every time destruction occurs, we start over, and we think it's the beginning. Why? Because all of the evidence that we ever existed is lost. And those who survive return to primitive savages and the cycle starts over. If we continue to develop our digital capacities and then lose our electrical grid, not only would we go down as a civilization, everything stored online would be lost. 5,000 years from now, all that would remain would be a few skeletons and maybe the basements of our houses. Number 7, who were the original Aryans? They were a group of warlike people originally from the Pleiades before the Pleiades committed to following natural law, which requires an alignment with either life or death. According to Billy Meyer, this group was headed by someone named Eris, and that is where the name Aryan came from. Eris is A-R-U-S. Aryan is A-R-Y-A-N. Number 8, how much of the Aryan hierarchical system of worship, power, and control have we absorbed and made normal? The answer, all of it. Their entire way of life and thinking was absorbed by the human population during the time that the Aryans were in control. The basis of their way of life offers or allows a few to live off the work, the creativity, and the efforts of the many, while holding all the resources that would allow the many to live freely. The goal of these controllers is control over life and death rather than an alignment with life or death. Unfortunately, without any knowledge of our true history, a lot of people assume that the epitome of life is somewhat like that of a Hollywood star who's considered beautiful, is followed and worshipped as someone to copy, someone to emulate, someone who's well paid and lives in a big, comfortable home, follows their own rules, who loves or has affairs with anyone they want, but who lives a life that is steeped in illusions and pretending. In truth, the extravagant spectacles put on by those who run the Hollywood crowd are a window into the pompous, attention-getting rituals that seek power, domination, and unrealistic adoration. If we are to transcend this kind of thinking, we need to replace it with something else. What other kinds of goals can we set for ourselves? I can suggest one, and that is going to be non-negotiable. It is the goal of alignment with life. It is a civilization based on cooperation and helpfulness. It is a civilization that is inclusive and caring. The alternative is an alignment with death, which is based on competition and an attitude of every man for himself. An alignment with death is a civilization that sets a few above the many and does not care what happens to those many. Eventually, the entire civilization collapses. And here we are. It's our choice. We are at the doorway to our future. A choice is required from each of us. Choose wisely. Beyond that, I can only provide hints. Most people just want to raise their family, enjoy life, work at something interesting, and live in peace with their neighbors. A few dream of adventure and will discover new paths. A few others create inventions that will help their fellows. An even smaller group are willing to serve all of life by working in and with the light. And those who are mature will tolerate fame but not seek it. They will stand quietly in the face of drama and threat without fighting it. They will heal others without taking that other's power. They will teach without preaching. They will love without conditions attached. And they will create with eternity in mind. Eventually, I hope, we will look back and realize we have made the right choice. Thank you very much.